The billionaire refused to dance, until she walked in hadn't planned to dance with anyone, not tonight. Not ever until she appeared. The golden ballroom of the Astor Hotel shimmered under 1,000 lights, each chandelier casting its own golden glow over the elite of Manhattan. Alexander Silverton stood aloof, glass in hand, the most eligible billionaire in New York, watching the crowd with practiced indifference. That all shattered the moment the black cleaning woman walked in, hand in hand with her young daughter. "What nonsense is this?" came a sharp voice, slicing through the air like a blade. Heads turned. How dare she bring a child to the most exclusive ball in New York? Margaret Silverton, host of the evening and matriarch of the Silverton family, stood rigid with rage, her eyes locked on the intruder. Keisha Williams, 32, still in her hotel-maid uniform, her daughter Maya clutching a worn doll. Keisha shouldn't have been there. Her shift ended at 6 p.m., hours before the $50,000 a ticket gala began. But Maya had left her favorite doll in the dressing room and cried so heartbreakingly that Keisha had returned to fetch it. Now she stood frozen beneath the chandeliers, aware of every disapproving stare. Margaret raised a gloved hand. "Security. We have intruders." 2 guards moved in, but not before the whispers started. Not before the glances turned cruel. "Mommy, why is that lady yelling at you?" Maya asked. Kesha knelt beside her, brushing a braid behind Maya's ear. "It's okay, sweetheart, we'll just grab your doll and go." But the security guards blocked their exit. Across the room, Alexander watched. At 35, he'd grown used to his mother's cold elegance and her obsession with social control. But something about this woman, her posture, her calm, her dignity stopped him cold. "Alexander, dear," Margaret hissed, appearing at his side. "Can you believe this embarrassment? A maid here." Keisha stood tall as silence rippled through the crowd. She knew this feeling. She'd been the only black girl in elite prep schools growing up, a scholarship student among legacies. She knew exactly how these stories usually ended. "Mum," one of the guards said quietly, "I need to ask you to leave." Keisha nodded, calm as still water. "I understand. I just came for my daughter's doll." Margaret laughed, sharp and cruel. "Oh, how convenient. Right when New York's wealthiest men are gathered in one room." And that's when Maya spoke loud and clear. "Why are you being so mean to my mom? She works really hard to take care of me." Silence. Deafening silence. Even Margaret faltered. Keisha knelt again, whispering something that made Maya smile. A movement so natural, so graceful, it caught Alexander's breath. "Do you guys know how to dance?" Maya asked the room, innocent and proud. "My mom taught me ballet from YouTube videos." "She dances beautifully." Something shifted. Alexander stepped forward. Despite the tug of Margaret's hand on his arm, he extended his hand. "May I have this dance?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. 200 elite guests stared, frozen, as Alexander Silverton, their golden prince, asked the maid to dance. Keisha hesitated. His hand was steady, sincere. Then Maya whispered, "Go, Mom, show them how beautifully you dance." And with that, Keisha took his hand. The orchestra hesitated, then resumed the waltz. What happened next stunned the room. Keisha danced like a prima ballerina. Her posture, her footwork, the fluid precision flawless, elegant, devastatingly beautiful. Margaret watched, horror blooming in her eyes. She had tried to humiliate Keisha, but what she'd done instead was expose her own pettiness. As the dance ended, the musician sat speechless. The crowd didn't move. "Impossible," Margaret whispered. Where would she learn to dance like that? Maya ran into her mother's arms. "Everyone saw how amazing you are, Mom," but Keisha's eyes were locked on Margaret, recognizing something in her gaze. A memory? A threat? "Alexander," Margaret hissed, grabbing her son's arm. "We need to speak. Now." But he didn't move. "Where did you study?" he asked Keisha, astonished. "You dance like a professional." Keisha swallowed. "A long time ago." Margaret stepped forward, her voice low and venomous. Because someone like you couldn't possibly have had access to classical ballet training. Unless. Before she could finish, another voice cut in. "Excuse me," said an older man, stepping from the shadows. I recognized that technique. All heads turned. It was Victor Hartwell, renowned dance critic for the New York Times. "That's real ballet training," he said, staring at Keisha. "Only one dancer ever moved quite like that." Keisha paled. "You wouldn't be, you know." "Impossible." Keisha Richardson died in a car crash 15 years ago. The name hit the ballroom like a bomb. Margaret turned white. Alexander looked stunned. Kesha took Maya's hand. "We should go," she said, softly. But the past was catching up, and the story that began with the dance was far from over. Alexander frowned, visibly confused, but murmurs were already spreading through the room like wildfire, especially among the older guests who remembered more than they let on. Then, from the edge of the crowd, an elderly woman stepped forward, eyes narrowed in recognition. "Keisha Richardson," she whispered. A hush fell again. "The prodigy," the woman continued, "who was once destined to be the first black principal ballerina at the Metropolitan Opera House." Maya, still clutching her doll, looked up at her mother with furrowed brows. "Mom, why are they talking about a dead person?" Keisha inhaled sharply. 15 years. 15 years of running, of hiding behind a new name, of trying to forget the dreams she buried. But the past had sharp edges, and tonight, it had found her again. Margaret's voice rang out, clear and cutting. "Because, child," she said, stepping forward with a chilling calm, "your mother isn't who she says she is." Eyes turned. The whispers sharpened. Kesha Richardson. The name still held weight in this world. At 17, she had earned a full scholarship to the Royal Ballet School. By 20, she was poised to break barriers as the first black principal dancer at the Met. Her rise had been unstoppable, until Margaret Silverton entered her dressing room. "I remember what I told you," Margaret said now, her voice dripping with feigned nostalgia. "Talent isn't enough. This world has rules, and some doors don't open for certain people." Keisha's expression didn't change. But Alexander's did. Confusion, then realization, then something darker. "You told me my talent spoke louder than your prejudice," Keisha said quietly. Margaret's smile twisted. "And I told you, we'll see." It had all unraveled in a week. Fake scandalous photos, anonymous rumors of drugs. Sponsors vanished. The Met dropped her. Her name became untouchable. She had disappeared overnight, taking a new last name and a vow never to set foot in the dance world again. She became a maid, a waitress, a survivor. She raised her daughter alone. And now? Margaret smiled sweetly like a knife hidden in silk. "What an extraordinary coincidence," she cooed. "That you, of all people, would show up at our family's charity ball. The same family that tried to help you all those years ago." Alexander looked between the two women, tension thick in the air. "Mom," he said cautiously, "what are you talking about?" Margaret didn't blink. "Justice delayed," she said smoothly. "That cleaning woman you're so smitten with, she's a professional manipulator. A disgrace to the dance world, who faked her way to the top and burned everything she touched." Maya squeezed her mother's hand. "Mom, are you okay?" Keisha looked at her daughter, then at Margaret, then at Alexander. She had spent 15 years believing she had been broken, that she had lost. But now, in the very ballroom where she had once been cast out, she realized something far more powerful. She had survived, and not just survived, endured, learned, prepared. She was no longer the naive 20-year-old girl blindsided by betrayal. She was a mother, a fighter, a woman forged in fire. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice strong enough to quiet the entire room. "I'm not the same person you tried to destroy." Because what Margaret Silverton didn't know was that Keisha had never stopped preparing. She had kept the evidence, the receipts, the truth. And now, for the first time in 15 years, she was ready to use it. 3 days later, Margaret Silverton was back in her element, spinning webs and pulling strings. She activated every contact, every favor, every powerful friend. She called Maya's school, her voice a symphony of concern. Double quotes Dr. Williams, she said delicately to the school principal. I'm worried about a situation involving a student, Maya Williams. I've heard disturbing things about her mother's past. I just thought, as a responsible patron, you should know. Across the city, in a tiny apartment above a corner bodega, Keisha sat at her kitchen table. But she wasn't crying. She wasn't hiding. She was organizing documents, birth certificates, legal records, hospital logs, stamped photos, everything she had archived over 15 years of silence. In the living room, Maya played with her doll, oblivious to the storm forming. Mommy, why are you going through those old papers? She asked. Just putting things in order, sweetheart, Keisha replied, flipping through a medical report with calm precision. The phone rang. Dr. Patricia Kuhn, assistant principal at Maya's school. Mrs. Williams, she said cautiously, there's been a concern brought to our attention. Some influential parents are questioning whether Maya should continue at our school, given certain allegations about your past. Keisha took a long, measured breath. 15 years ago, a call like that would have shattered her. Now, she smiled, cold and ready. Dr. Kuhn, she said smoothly, thank you for letting me know. How about we schedule a meeting? Because this time, Keisha wasn't going to retreat. This time, she was going to fight. I have some information, Keisha said into the phone, her voice steady, that may clarify those allegations. She ended the call and sat in silence for a moment. Then she reached into a drawer and pulled out a worn, yellowed business card, edges frayed, letters slightly faded. David Kumar, private investigator and reputation recovery specialist, had given it to her 5 years ago. Back when he stumbled upon her true identity, when he realized the quiet hotel maid was none other than the vanished prodigy, Keisha Richardson. Back then, she hadn't been ready. But now, she dialed his number. David, she said when he answered, it's Keisha, Keisha Richardson. I think I'm ready to accept your help. 2 hours later, David sat in her modest kitchen, surrounded by the comforting clutter of real-life Maya's drawings on the fridge, a small potted plant on the windowsill, a still warm teacup in front of him. His eyes were lit with the kind of focused energy that only comes when justice is finally within reach. Keisha, he said, sliding a thick folder onto the table, I never stopped looking into your case. He opened it. Dozens of pages, photos, notes, names. Margaret Silverton didn't just ruin you. She's done this before. At least 6 other women. All gifted, all women of color, all eliminated. He spread out the evidence like a deck of cards. A classical pianist, an opera soprano, to stage actresses, a sculptor, a novelist. Different fields, different dreams, but the same pattern every time. Fake scandals, anonymous accusations, withdrawn sponsorships, careers shattered. Maya wandered in, her curiosity piqued by the spread of papers. Mom, she asked quietly, who are all these people? Keisha placed a gentle arm around her daughter. They're stories of brave people, baby, she said. People who were hurt, but who might finally get justice. David leaned forward. And here's where it gets even more disturbing. Margaret doesn't work alone. She uses a PR firm, one that specializes in manufactured scandals. Crisis management, they call it. But really, they're professional character assassins. Their entire job is to protect the elite and bury anyone who threatens the system. Keisha flipped through the documents, her eyes scanning with the precision of someone trained to analyze the subtlest movements, once with music, now with paper trails. You have proof. David nodded. Leaked emails, financial transfers, some audio recordings. Enough to raise serious questions, but not yet enough to destroy her. For that, I need something more. Something that forces her to reveal her hand. That was when Keisha finally smiled. It wasn't a warm smile, it was cold, precise, the kind of smile you wear when you see your enemy's next move before they make it. David, she said, what if I told you Margaret's going to try to destroy me again within the next few days? He blinked. You're sure? She thinks I'm just a scared cleaning lady. That I'll panic and run like last time. She leaned back. But what she doesn't know is that for the last 15 years, I wasn't just surviving. She opened her phone and showed David a group chat on WhatsApp. Former hotel staff from the Astor Hotel, waiters, bellhops, valets, security, housekeepers. They weren't just workers, they were witnesses, the invisible eyes and ears of the elite. People Margaret never saw. People who saw everything. Do you know the advantage of being invisible in Margaret's world? Keisha asked. David looked at her, intrigued. She does everything right in front of you. Because in her eyes, you don't exist. David sat back, the pieces clicking into place. You've been collecting information? Keisha nodded. I documented everything, every suspicious conversation, every discarded document, every email they printed and tossed in the trash without shredding. She stood, walked to the closet, and pulled down an old shoebox. Inside were flash drives, photos, notes, audio recordings, even dated, printed documents, all carefully preserved. David stared at the contents, stunned. Keisha, if this is what I think it is, it's exactly what you think it is, she said. Margaret Silverton thinks she's hunting easy prey. She looked him dead in the eye, but the truth is she's been the one hunted. For years, and never knew it. Maya, listening from the doorway, looked up in awe. Mom, are you a secret detective? Keisha chuckled softly. Something like that, sweetheart. Sometimes, when powerful people hurt others, someone has to gather the truth and make sure it's heard. David picked up a flash drive, turning it over in his hand like it was made of gold. Keisha, he said slowly, this could expose everything. She stood tall, shoulders squared with a calm fury. And when she tries to strike again, I'll be ready. Because this time, Margaret Silverton is about to learn something the hard way. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. That, underestimating a woman who survived 15 years of silence was the most dangerous mistake of her life. The woman they thought was a victim had not spent the last 15 years merely hiding. She had been preparing quietly, patiently, ruthlessly. And when someone underestimated for so long finally decides to fight back, the fall of the powerful is not just inevitable, it's spectacular. The next morning, Margaret Silverton awoke with a familiar thrill, the feeling of victory hanging just within reach. The final blow had been set in motion. A damning article, planted in one of New York's most respected newspapers, would paint Keisha as a manipulative fraud, a former ballerina emotionally exploiting a naive billionaire. Alexander will finally see what kind of woman she really is, Margaret muttered, dialing the number of the reporter she had bribed. But the voice on the other end was not what she expected. Miss Silverton, we have a problem. Margaret sat upright. What kind of problem? Someone leaked our arrangement, and more than that. Documents, recordings, bank transfers. It's all with the Times now. The story's out in 2 hours. The chill that ran down Margaret's spine was instant. What documents? Evidence of your involvement in removing multiple women from cultural institutions. It's single quotes extensive. Across the city, in David Kumar's apartment, Keisha stood at the center of a small war room. Journalists, civil rights attorneys, activists. She was no longer a maid, no longer a silenced dancer. She was the architect of a reckoning. David stood beside her, addressing the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you not just Keisha Richardson, one of the most gifted ballerinas of her generation, but the woman who spent 15 years documenting systemic abuse by one of New York's most powerful families. Alexander arrived at Keisha's door just as the press conference began broadcasting live. He had received a message from her. If you want to know the truth about your mother, come now. Inside, he found her calm, centered. "Keisha, what is this?" he asked, his eyes darting toward the cameras. She handed him a tablet. "It's time you knew who your mother really is. And what she's done, not just to me, but to at least 6 other women over the past 2 decades." On screen, the first wave of evidence began to appear. Audio recordings of Margaret instructing journalists to fabricate scandals. Financial records showing large payments to shadowy PR firms known for smear campaigns. Emails detailing a decades-long effort to eliminate undesirable voices from the arts. And then, a recording played. Margaret's voice. "These people need to remember their place. When they try to rise above it, someone has to restore order." Alexander froze. "My God," he whispered. She really did it. At school, Maya was safe, shielded from the media explosion her mother had so precisely orchestrated. Keisha had waited 15 years for this moment. She would not let her daughter see her rage, only her rise. At the Astor Hotel, Margaret sat in her presidential suite when she heard her own voice broadcasting on national television. "A person like her should never be allowed into our world. It's about preserving the natural order." She lunged for her phone, but the line was jammed. Her allies were silent. The journalists she once controlled, they turned. And they were already reporting. In a matter of hours, Margaret Silverton's transformation was complete. From cultural matriarch to social pariah. Her phone rang again. It was Alexander. "Mom," he said, voice cold. "You need to explain those recordings?" Alexander. "Sweetheart, you don't understand. I did it for us, for our legacy." "No," he replied. "You did it out of cruelty, and now you'll face the consequences." On social media, #Justice for Kesha began trending worldwide. Clips of her dancing graceful defiance circulated alongside headlines exposing Margaret's abuses. The juxtaposition was too powerful to ignore. The elegance of a silenced artist versus the rod of systemic gatekeeping. David Kamar appeared on primetime television, a folder of evidence in hand. Margaret Silverton used her power to destroy the careers of rising Black and Latino women because their talent threatened her vision of who belongs in the arts. Major companies began cutting ties with the Silverton Foundation. Museums removed plaques with the family name. The Metropolitan Opera announced a formal investigation into past discriminatory practices. Margaret, desperate, made one final move, a live interview. "These accusations are ridiculous," she said with a tight smile. "I've always championed diversity." But Keisha had anticipated this, too. During the broadcast, David released a recording from just 6 months earlier. Margaret, casually telling a donor, "Certain people are invading spaces that don't naturally belong to them." The host looked stunned. The audience silent. Margaret stammered, denied, contradicted herself. Then, finally, she stood and walked off camera humiliated. That night, Alexander arrived at Keisha's apartment. Maya sat at the table doing her homework, blissfully unaware that her mother had just dismantled one of the most powerful families in America. Alexander stood in the doorway, quiet for a moment. "Keisha," he said softly, "I came to apologize for my mother." Alexander looked at Keisha, guilt weighing on his features. "For my family. For everything you've endured. I'm sorry." Keisha met his eyes, her voice calm and firm. "You don't need to apologize for someone else's crimes," she said, "but you do need to decide what kind of man you want to be from this moment forward." Maya looked up at them from the couch. "Mom, why are so many people talking about you on TV?" Keisha smiled gently. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, when powerful people hurt others, someone has to stand up and tell the truth. And today, was our turn." Across town, Margaret Silverton sat alone in her mansion. The silence was deafening. Her employees had walked out. Her friends stopped answering her calls. The board of her family's foundation had voted for her immediate removal. She looked out over the city she once controlled and saw it clearly for the first time, not as a stage for her dominance, but As the place where she had finally been unmasked, the woman she had dismissed as a cleaning lady had outmaneuvered her, completely patiently collecting evidence, building allies, and waiting for the perfect moment. Margaret tried one final call to Alexander. He didn't answer. For 15 years, she had silenced others. Now, it was her own voice that was silenced by the weight of her actions. As night fell over New York, a new reality emerged. The woman who had once been erased from the stage had reclaimed it, not just for herself, but for all those like her. 6 months later, Keisha stood beneath the lights of Lincoln Center, not as an employee or a ghost from the past, but as the artistic director of New York's first inclusive ballet school. The school had been funded by public donations after her story went viral, and by unexpected source, Alexander Silverton. In the front row of her class, Maya, now 9, danced with confidence, surrounded by children of all backgrounds and walks of life. Before the performance, she turned to her mother and whispered, "Mom. You turned your pain into something beautiful." Margaret Silverton, meanwhile, lived alone in a small apartment in Queens. Her friends had abandoned her, the foundation was gone. And every day, she watched from her television as the woman she had tried to erase built something lasting. Alexander had taken full control of the Silverton estate. His first act, a $10 million donation to Keisha's school. "Why are you doing this?" Margaret asked him once during a rare, tense visit. Alexander looked her in the eye. "Because I finally understand. Our legacy should be defined not by who we keep out, but by who we lift up." David Kamar's book, The Dance of Justice, became a national bestseller. Keisha used the royalties to expand the school to other cities. In a CNN interview, she was asked whether she had forgiven Margaret. "I forgave her," she replied, "but not for her sake. For mine. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But forgiveness doesn't mean erasing consequences. Those still matter." Today, her school trains over 500 children. Maya, inheriting her mother's grace and discipline, already dreamed of becoming a professional dancer, with one crucial difference. She grew up knowing that her voice mattered. One evening, during a performance, Margaret appeared in the back row of the audience. Uninvited. Maya spotted her and turned to her mother, whispering with the clarity only a child raised on truth could have, "I think she finally understands." Keisha looked down at her. "Understands what, sweetheart?" "That talent doesn't have a color, and when you try to dim someone else's light, you only end up standing in the dark." Keisha pulled her daughter close, tears in her eyes. 15 years ago, a young ballerina was destroyed by power and prejudice. But from that ruin, something stronger was born, a woman who turned pain into purpose, humiliation into inspiration, silence into a voice that could no longer be ignored. True revenge wasn't destroying Margaret Silverton, it was building a future where other children like Maya would never have to survive what she did. Because when the world tries to tear you down, the greatest response is vengeance. It's rising so high that your story rewrites the rules for everyone. If this story moved you, if it reminded you to never give up, even when the world tries to silence you, subscribe. Because sometimes justice comes late. But when it does, it changes everything.